We begin with more explosions in Lebanon. Lebanese officials say at least 14 people have been killed and more than 400 injured in what appears to have been a second round of explosions of communications devices. This comes just a day after at least 12 people were killed when pagers used by Hezbollah members exploded. Hezbollah militants began using the devices in the hopes of avoiding Israeli surveillance of their mobile phones. The militant group blames Israel for the explosions and says the attacks will not go unpunished.
A fresh wave of explosions across Lebanon, some of them at the funeral of 3 Hezbollah members and a child killed by exploding pagers the day before. A source close to Hezbollah and rescuers said walkie-talkies used by the group exploded as part of blasts heard in Beirut. And in the southern city of Sidon, a cell phone shop caught fire after an explosion there. The new blasts come as Lebanon is still in shock the day after what's been described as an unprecedented attack. Hundreds of pagers used by the militia group Hezbollah blew up over about an hour, killing at least a dozen people and injuring thousands. In the aftermath, many schools and shops are closed and residents are still reeling.
What happened yesterday shocked us. It was unimaginable. No one could have thought that pagers could explode like that. The scene was shocking, how people were torn apart right in front of you. They were exploding right in front of you.
One blast was caught on camera. In a statement read on Lebanese television, Hezbollah, which is considered a terrorist group by the EU and others, placed the blame squarely on Israel and vowed to punish the perpetrators of the attack. Some Lebanese agreed with their message.
We will retaliate. We have to teach them a lesson they can't forget, because those people, if they are not harmed, they will not be deterred.
Many Hezbollah members were using the pagers because the group's leadership had thought the older technology could evade tracking by Israel. Security experts believe Israel's spy agency Mossad was able to insert a small amount of explosives into devices somewhere along the supply chain before they reached Hezbollah. Hospitals in Beirut have been overwhelmed with the sudden rush of patients. Staff say they treated grisly wounds.
I was the emergency doctor last night at the Hotel Dieu hospital. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, we received injuries due to devices exploding in people's hands. The injuries were mainly to the eyes and hands, which caused finger amputations, shrapnel in the eyes. Some people lost their sight.
Tensions are running high in Lebanon. Hezbollah has already fired some 20 rockets into Israel on Wednesday in apparent retaliation for the attack.
And for more on this, I'm joined by Melinda Haas. She's an assistant professor of international affairs at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School in public and international affairs. Good to have you with us, Melinda. An unprecedented attack, and now we're hearing of potential new explosions. I wonder, how can an attack of this precision and scale be organised?
Again, I think the assumption that this is a state-sponsored operation probably must be correct, given both the geographic extent, the technical sophistication, and just the orchestration of the explosions themselves, much less the sort of on-the-ground intelligence required to infiltrate multiple types of devices that Hezbollah agents are using.
Does it surprise you that someone has been able to orchestrate and complete this task?
It doesn't surprise me. I think it is sort of unprecedented in its scale, and especially now that it's extending to multiple types of devices. But I think the orchestration is meant to send a message that that the sponsor, probably Israel here, is able to sort of reach into Hezbollah's organization, no matter what types of low-tech devices are being used, and get to those people even on the ground.
Melinda, do we know any detail of just how much Hezbollah relied on this form of communication in their day-to-day running?
Right. There has been a shift from more sophisticated cell phone technology that was more susceptible to Israel's SIGINT capabilities to these sort of lower tech devices, walkie-talkies, pagers, in order to try to circumvent that intelligence. But this goes to show that there are important trade-offs between low-tech and high-tech devices, and that even low-tech are not unsusceptible to being infiltrated.
If it is confirmed that Israel is behind the attack, does this constitute a violation of international law, do you think?
I think that Israel would try to make the argument that by targeting these specific shipments of pagers and potentially walkie-talkies, that they were attempting to target only military combatants, right? Only Hezbollah members. But I think there is an argument to be made that this is potentially an indiscriminate attack, right? At the time of the explosions, it's unclear who had possession of the pagers or the walkie-talkies. Where were those individuals? Were civilians at risk? I mean, clearly they were based on the results. And due to that sort of indiscriminate targeting and potential civilian targeting, that would be where the international law concerns come in.
And when you say indiscriminate, do you also get that sense that it's almost opportunistic, that they saw an opening to take out an attack like this?
Right, especially sort of the timing of this operation, the timing, the extensive timing needed to prepare for such an operation. And then when the charges themselves went off, I think it's important to consider the why of that. Why now? And potentially that was due to an opportunistic or the potential to sort of lose the opportunity. So they took advantage of it now.
Hezbollah claims Israel is behind the attack. It has apparently already carried out the first cross-border retaliation. What do you think could be or will be the international consequences of this act?
I think, as many are concerned, of course, for the potential for regional escalation here. I think that this is a continuation of the back and forth between Hezbollah and Israel that's been occurring since October 7th and, of course, before. I think that Israel is very carefully using these types of covert operations, both on sort of ground level Hezbollah members, as well as covert operations against Hezbollah leaders, to slowly escalate and not escalate to sort of full uses of force, right? The moderate level of escalation provided by covert operations could prevent further regional escalation to include Iran or other potential regional implications.
Right. And to the US, before we go, US has always stood firmly behind Israel. If it's confirmed that Israel is behind the attacks, what could this mean for US foreign policy?
Of course, the US has really been pushing a diplomatic solution to these conflicts with Gaza and with Hezbollah. The US is not interested in a regional conflict and embroiling Iran or sort of more traditional uses of force. I think that we will likely see strong words by the US, but I'm not sure ultimately it will affect the US's aid to Israel in a meaningful way.
Melinda Haas, it's been fantastic to get your insight. Thanks so much for your time on DW News.
Thank you.
So how did these explosions happen? Now, it's believed that Israel most likely infiltrated the supply chain or the distribution network of the pagers that exploded on Tuesday. We have more now on the pagers and what experts say had to be inside in order for the devices to detonate.
This is an Apollo pager, the model that exploded simultaneously across Lebanon. Hezbollah started using the devices extensively last year for security reasons. Unlike mobile phones, they can't be traced. Experts say most likely the pagers contained explosives, possibly just 2 or 3 grams, that were inserted at some point between manufacture and delivery. But the supply and delivery chain are murky. The pagers were marked with the logo of the Gold Apollo Company in Taiwan. But the company's chairman says his firm didn't actually make them.
This company, BAC, has cooperated with us. and has represented many of our products for about 3 years. They also wanted to make pagers and asked me if they could use our company's brand name. They paid us the brand name fee, and they designed it themselves.
That takes us to Hungary, where BAC Consulting is located in the capital Budapest. The address listed for BAC is a simple building that appears to be the legal headquarters for multiple firms. At this point, the picture grows even murkier. It's not clear yet if BAC actually made the devices. Nor is it clear when Hezbollah ordered them or when they arrived. It appears that at some point between order and delivery, Israel's intelligence service was able to get hold of the pagers and insert explosives and a detonator before delivery to Hezbollah. The pagers apparently ran for months before exploding, signs of a sophisticated operation that must have been planned long before.
There's a lot to unpack here, and to help us do that, I'm joined now by Justin Cappos. He's a professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at New York University. Professor, it's good to have you with us. So, yesterday it was pagers. Today we're talking about walkie-talkies. How would an attack such as this, how would it be executed technically?
So what happens is these devices are such that you communicate over wireless networks, much like your cell phone or other things receive wireless signals. These can use signals in those bands, and they can also use signals in other bands of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so what happens is that if you put a little bit of electronics inside of a device like a pager or a walkie-talkie, then when it receives a signal, it can be, a specific signal. It can then trigger something like an explosion.
So then if Hezbollah, it's been reported that Hezbollah was using pagers to avoid surveillance, to protect itself basically, as opposed to using smartphones, which can be traced. So, but what you're saying is that these pagers, these devices actually provided no protection.
Well, what Hezbollah did actually was smart to try to protect against tracing, because things like a cell phone always have a two-way communication. It's your phone is going and communicating with the cell tower, you're making calls, you're sending data back and forth. Whereas some devices like certain models of pagers only receive information and they don't actually send any information back. Mm-hmm. So that does stop them from being traced. And so Hezbollah actually did a good thing from a security standpoint of making there be less information about where their specific members were by not having a bidirectional communication through something like their pagers.
So how sophisticated then would this kind of operation be to execute, having all of these devices explode at the same time? And is this the type of operation that you would expect a state to execute, or could you see non-state actors being behind it?
Well, really, one of the most difficult parts was tampering with all of these devices before they got in the hands of Hezbollah. And that is the type of thing that you basically need a state actor or someone like that to go and do. And then once you get to the point where you have all these devices that you want to tamper with that are in place, it is also something that's easier for someone like a state actor, nation state, to be able to do. Very, extensive resources are needed for a lot of this. But you can also see for certain weaker devices, you can imagine situations where other types of hacker groups or things could go and, take control of and cause damage to devices. We've seen a lot of that, not necessarily in a wireless sense, but we've seen a lot of that before where there have been lots of, for instance, internet-connected cameras and other internet-connected devices that have been turned into parts of botnets and used to launch attacks on major tech sites and so on.
I mean, I get the impression that we're dealing with a completely new frontier of warfare here, and we're just beginning to understand the dimensions. Other devices that could possibly be tampered with and used as weapons. Could medical devices, pacemakers, for example, they're usually connected to a network. Could they be targeted?
Absolutely. In fact, former Vice President Dick Cheney his pacemaker was not network connected and needed special equipment for people to be able to interact with it exactly to protect against this type of threat. And I think that this threat, it's very common to think of things like medical devices, and this is a very serious, very real threat. But there are other aspects out there that are also very, very serious threats. Automobiles, for instance, the automotive industry has done a tremendous job of improving their security, but there still is quite a long ways to go. And you can imagine what would happen if an organization is able to get in and disable the brakes or force acceleration of a large number of cars in a major metropolitan area. It would be pandemonium. And that doesn't require any of the type of supply chain attacks that you saw here, which to me is really the newest thing about this type of attack, that is, allegedly Israel was able to go and interfere and put explosives inside of a lot of these devices.
For the past 10, 15 years, we've heard a lot of praise for the Internet of Things, a future where everything and everyone will be interconnected. What we've seen in Lebanon in the past 2 days, should we see that as maybe a wake-up call to the threats that we put ourselves into, the dangers we put ourselves into by being connected?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that my wife and I agreed on was no internet-connected devices in our household without me having a good look at them. And we have very little in there. I think a lot of security experts view them as risk. And yes, it's kind of cool that you can tap a button on your smartphone and maybe make a cup of coffee while you're still in bed. That might be a neat thing to do. But what that really means is that someone else across the internet can do things like cause your coffee maker to go on, and possibly, if they know what they're doing and the coffee maker is not very well designed, maybe even do things like start a fire in your home, or at a minimum, know that you're home, know when you're out on vacation so that people can rob you. And so really, Internet of Things have a massive risk surface. I think consumers don't really understand that. But talk to somebody who's a security expert, and they will most likely not have a lot of those devices in their home.
So I assume that you don't have a smart refrigerator in your home, for example. But you do have
no smart refrigerator, no smart oven, no smart anything.
But you do have Wi-Fi in your house. I assume you have a smart TV. Is there any danger that a smart TV, could that be a point of entry into a person's home that we hadn't thought of, that could be a danger?
I don't have a smart TV, but they are absolutely a point of danger. In fact, a lot of them, there was a scandal a while ago where there's a manufacturer that effectively was streaming audio from consumers' homes to a third party that was supposed to do AI recognition so that you could do something like use AI commands to turn on your television or do other stuff like that. And it's things like television, smart TVs and stuff like this are just great for surveillance if you were so inclined to do so. So you really should think about the risks. Think about anything that your device can do. Imagine that someone else can make your device do that if it's an Internet of Things device. And in fact, they can often do much more than you can do with it. So that should be something that should worry consumers.
Well, this has definitely been maybe an overdue reality check for a lot of people. Professor Justin Cappos with Computer Science and Engineering at New York University. Professor, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Matthew Levitt. He's an expert on counterterrorism and intelligence with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He joins me from Washington, D.C. Matthew, it's good to have you with us. In Lebanon, we have seen 2 waves of attacks in as many days, blasts apparently targeting the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. How much damage would you say have we seen coming from these exploding devices towards Hezbollah?
So we have not one but 2 sets of incidents yesterday and today. First, a series of pagers going off, thousands, and now handheld radios. Hezbollah simply cannot have any confidence in its supply chain and its communication systems. There are reports that people in Lebanon are throwing out all kinds of electronic items, including microwaves and whatnot. Hezbollah's ability to communicate with its operatives has been severely diminished. These are not pagers or walkie-talkies that you could walk into a hardware store and pick up in Lebanon. These were procured by Hezbollah specifically for its operatives. So it was very targeted against those people who would be carrying them. And the effect is that Hezbollah wants to retaliate, but other than shooting small numbers of rockets just across the Israeli border, Hezbollah's got to be a little bit concerned about stepping too far. They could shoot some longer range rockets into Israel, but they're not really prepared with their communications down to be able to contend with the Israeli response. And I think Israel here is trying to communicate to Hezbollah that after 11 months, almost a year, of firing rockets into its country and forcing 60,000 civilians to be displaced from their homes, enough is enough. And either Hezbollah pays attention to the diplomatic U.S. effort led by Amos Hochstein and agrees to stop firing and redeploy from the border, or I anticipate the Israelis will feel the need to take things upon themselves and militarily redeploy Hezbollah from the border. And this is an effort to say, we're serious, we don't want to do it, but we'll do it if we have to.
Yeah, I want to pick up right there, and I'd like for you to listen to what the Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, what he said today while addressing Israeli soldiers.
I believe that we are at the start of a new phase in the war. The center of gravity is moving north, meaning that we are allocating forces, resources, and energy to the northern region.
So after hearing that, I mean, would you say that the past 2 days, today and yesterday, these explosions, were they the warning shots of an imminent strike by Israel in Lebanon? In other words, Mossad moves first, followed by the IDF.
No, I don't think that they were a warning strike. Hello?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that they were a warning strike. I think it was just the opposite. I think it's Israel saying to Hezbollah, step down. We don't want to do this full-scale war. The Israeli cabinet did just say that part of the war aim is now to end the hostilities in the north. And the defense minister is making clear that from the Israeli perspective, they've been the victim of almost daily Hezbollah firings, and now they're going to focus on the north now that they've largely defeated Hamas in the south and try and end that skirmish. Hopefully it ends without a war. I think this is an effort to signal to Hezbollah there will be more costs if you continue to keep up the fight at the current level. Even this level can't be tolerated anymore, even though we've tolerated it for 11 months, is what the Israelis are saying.
I read today one analysis is that the ability to do what we've seen in the past 2 days was about to be discovered by Hezbollah, or Hezbollah was going to be in a position to block Israel's ability to do that. So Israel had no choice but to roll out these attacks. Your assessment of that?
So I've heard the same, and I think it's probably true, but it's not the case that it means that they had no choice. You know, you invest time and effort in intelligence operations, and you don't necessarily act on all of them. This reportedly was put in place to be there in the event of full-scale war to disrupt Hezbollah communications and make it difficult for them to continue prosecuting said war. Now, reportedly, some people in Hezbollah got an inkling to it. The Israelis decided it was a use it or lose it moment. Then they have to make a decision. It's not automatically that you necessarily use it. And so I think in the moment the decision was, no, we should use it now, even ahead of full-scale war, in an effort to signal that we want to avoid full-scale war. But there will be increasing efforts like these. We have capabilities. Remember, this comes not as a one-off, but after a series of Israeli intelligence coups. Just a few days ago, they sent their special forces into Syria, taking out an Iranian facility there focused on preparing and delivering weapons to Hezbollah. Just a few weeks earlier, Hezbollah planned to fire rockets at Tel Aviv into Israeli security and intelligence headquarters. Israelis find out about it, identify where the launchers are, preemptively take out those launchers. That itself comes just after the assassination of their most senior militant figure, Fuad Shukr, and a day later, the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran for the inauguration of the Iranian president in an IRGC safe house. The Israelis are saying, we have intelligence capabilities, We intend to use them in an effort to bring this almost year-long war to a close.
It almost, on the outside for a layman such as myself, I mean, it looks like a psychops strike. I mean, you've got, just imagine people doing their business and all of a sudden pagers begin exploding. And then the next day, you've got people even going to the funeral of people who were killed the day before, and walkie-talkies begin exploding. I mean, this has got to create a lot of paranoia, a lot of uncertainty. It's got to make Hezbollah question any thing that they had considered to be certain 48 hours ago.
And that certainly was the intent. The irony is that it comes as a result of Hezbollah actually trying to have better operational security. Back in February, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah gave a public talk saying, Israelis don't need collaborators. They don't need agents. Their agents are in your pocket. It's your cell phone. It's your wife's cell phone. It's your kid's cell phone. They can be tracked. They can be hacked. Get rid of them. We're giving you pagers. Mm-hmm. And they called this their blinding strategy, to make it so that the Israelis couldn't see and couldn't hear what was happening. In the end, it backfired on them because it gave the Israelis the opportunity to penetrate their supply chain and insert really just grams of explosives into thousands of devices, now having the effect that you just described, not only of completely upending their communications networks, but making every Hezbollah member look over his or her shoulder. I imagine many Hezbollah people did not show up to work today.
Do you think, before I let you go, do you think that the end effect of this is going to be that Hezbollah is going to pull back? We're going to see this work as deterrent? Because a lot of people are afraid that this is going to be the beginning of a wider conflict. I'm
too smart to answer that question. If I could, I'd be a much wealthier man. The reality is that this won't be just the only effort, and there'll be communications, both public and private, to Hezbollah in the hours and days to come. It would be really good if Hezbollah decided to declare divine victory, as they did in 2006, say that what they're doing is for the benefit of Lebanese, and begin to pull back a little bit. I don't know that that will happen. And I don't know that there will be a ceasefire in Gaza, which is the other thing that could lead Hezbollah to stop shooting rockets. I know that the Israelis are very, very serious about communicating to Hezbollah and then following through with their promise that if the diplomacy doesn't work, if they don't redeploy and stop shooting on their own, that the Israelis will take matters into their own hands to defend their citizens, so that and end Hezbollah's almost year-long rocket campaign against the north of the country.
Counter-terrorism expert Matthew Levitt with the Washington Institute. Matthew, good talking with you. Fascinating also hearing your insights. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.